Well, this is JC. I have another little story that I'd like to tell. A very good friend of mine, Francois from Rare Orbison, my nephew, friend, associate, and etc. Very nice young fellow. Heard me say one time that I had met Roy Orbison, and I think he was very curious about this, and he wanted to hear the story. It was kind of a brief story. It was a brief event, I should say. The meeting of Roy Orbison didn't last very long. But I promised him I'd tell the story about it, and so that's what I'm going to do. The name of the story is, of course, How I Met Roy Orbison by J.C. It's kind of brief, so I'm going to preface it a little bit so the story will have a little body to go along with the main event. So I'll start now. How I Met Roy Orbison. When I was a young man, actually just a boy, I was always very restless. I hated school because it was very boring to me. I never was an athlete of any sort, but I always enjoyed writing and singing, and I always had a burning desire to be somewhere else instead of where I was at the time. So several times I traveled by freight train or by thumb, hitchhiking, from my home in Modesto, California, to Odessa, Texas, where my father and my sister and sometimes my brother lived. During my travels, I met a lot of people. Some were very good, some were good, and the others were very good, is how I should put it. I've met very few bad people on my travels, very few. It's amazing. One person I met who was very good was a beautiful blue-eyed blonde girl named Blondie. I called her Blondie. I won't tell her real name here because she might not want it spread around. If she's still as beautiful now as she was then, she'd probably be too many men wanting her address, and I'd have to be impolite and not give it. And anyhow, this little tale is about the time many years ago when I met Roy Orbison. It was on one of my many trips to Odessa, Texas, where my father, my brother, and my sister lived. I had hitched a freight train in Modesto, California, my home, and kept to the freights all the way to Odessa to visit my folks there. The first time I went to Odessa, Texas was in 1948. I had managed to graduate junior high school, which was the 7th and 8th grades, and I attended a graduation ceremony wearing a suit with a tie, the only one I ever owned. And I received my diploma and a certificate of graduation. My mother was so proud that I accomplished this outstanding feat that she rewarded me by buying a bus ticket to Odessa to see my father and my sister. She had no idea the can of worms she would open with this act of kindness and appreciation for her baby boy. Well, while I was there, I met a girl named Maggie who lived down the block a few houses from where I was staying. I wasn't especially interested in the girl, who incidentally would later become my first wife, but she was very friendly and sociable. It was through her that I met Blondie. Blondie and Maggie were very close friends. One day Maggie and Blondie came to my sister's grocery store to buy a loaf of bread. When I saw Blondie, my eyes about popped out of my head. She was beautiful. She had long blonde hair and big blue eyes, and every time I looked at her I felt a blush start. I could feel my face turn red. I was very shy as a youngster, and I had a hard time talking to girls, especially pretty ones like Blondie. But she made it easy because she was very friendly and outgoing, not at all shy. Because she was so outgoing, I became acquainted with her family, especially her brother Bob and her mother. Her mother was a robust woman and very friendly. When she found out I played the guitar and sang, she asked to hear a Hank Williams song. And because she was so sweet, I lost most of my shyness around her, and I obliged and sang Hank Williams songs for her many, many times through the years afterwards. I sang Hank Williams songs for this lady. So now I'm acquainted with Blondie and her family. Okay, then one day, sometime later, when I was at Blondie's house, lusting after her as usual, secretly of course, we decided we needed some soft drinks. I volunteered to go to the corner grocery store and get them. Cokes, I think, and immediately Blondie offered to go with me, so off we went to the grocery store. We got to the store and we bought our sodas, and I took my guitar out of the car and I started singing a song to her. Gosh, why couldn't I be famous? Then maybe she would like me more. You know, when I look back on it now, I have to wonder, maybe she liked me more than I realized then, but I was so shy and I never responded to anything that might have been a hint of that from her because I didn't believe it could be possible. Not with this beautiful, beautiful girl. So now we're at the store. Blondie put the sodas in the car, and she was listening to me pick my guitar a little. We were standing right in front of the entrance to the store when a funny-looking little fellow walked up and stopped. He was skinny, and he had pretty big ears and very small eyes. I noticed his eyes, especially because I have very small eyes, too. He wasn't especially good looking, but he seemed pleasant, and he had a very soft voice. He looked Blondie over a little and smiled as if he knew her. Then he looked at me. He asked if he could see my guitar. It was an old K F-hole guitar. I handed it to him, and he started to play a few chords, and he sang a few bars of some song I'd never heard, a rock-type song. I noticed that his voice was very high and sounded a little too strong and too loud for this body of his. After a brief moment, he handed the guitar back to me and thanked me for letting him see it. I told him he was welcome. Then he said he was going to a party at some guy's house and asked if we would like to come along and maybe play a little music. I thought it was pretty obvious he was much more interested in Blondie than in either me or my old K guitar with the F-holes. Blondie looked at me and smiled a "I don't think so" smile. So I told him I didn't think so, that we already had other plans and we had to get these Cokes back to our house. He was very polite and said it was too bad, but thanks for showing me his guitar. Then he took one long, last, lingering look at Blondie, and we said goodbye, and he went on into the store, and we left. After that, I commented to Blondie that that fellow had really looked her over pretty good, and she said yes, she knew him. She had been in a class at school with him at one time. She told me his name was Roy something or other. Oh yeah, Roy Orbison. We laughed about it a little, and I never heard about him again until 1963, when I was in Lewiston, Idaho. I was listening to the radio one day, and I heard this really great song being sung by some guy with a very high, clear, and a crisp voice. I didn't care much for fast songs at that time, but this one really hit a high note with me. It was Pretty Woman. And I listened to the announcer say that this was Roy Orbison. I was between wives then, and I had a lady friend who just happened to be a Roy Orbison fan and had a ton of Roy Orbison albums, all of them, I guess, that he had made up to that time. After hearing the songs on these albums, I couldn't get enough of Roy Orbison. That was a turning point in my singing life. After hearing the outstanding voice coming from this man, I began putting more feeling into my own songs. That's when singing became fun and much more personal to me than it had been, more now than just a pastime. When I saw Roy's picture the first time, he seemed so familiar to me. Then some years later, I couldn't remember much about him, but he just was really familiar. Then some years later, I remembered where I'd seen him. I talked to Blondie too, and she remembered. He was that funny-looking little guy who invited us to a party one time in Odessa, Texas, many years ago. I have wondered what might have happened if we'd gone to that party. Maybe Roy and I would have become friends, and who knows what might have happened with us. Now, here's the announcer. Now, here are Roy Orbison and JC singing their newest hit song, If Only. That's a great title, and I think it's appropriate for here. There's a poetic saying by John Greenleaf Whittier that really rings a bell with me about all of this in this story. It goes, "For all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these. It might have been." But I won't complain too much. Maybe I'll just dream a bit and think about what might have been. Thank you very much. This is JC.